just experienced some Calumet region heritage. Train blocking road.
I knew you were gonna say
Oh,
train.
God, you got trained.
Oh, smokes.
I thought you were boating up there.
There's a PowerPoint amongst all the pictures. I apologize. I left an hour and a half ago
Oh my
for a
God.
35-minute drive. What's the name of that road? Dickey Road?
Yeah.
There's a train blocking it
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
forever.
I've been on that.
So, yeah.
The two unique conditions of traffic are being trained or being bridged. If you're really unlucky, you get both.
And, you know, I'm not familiar with the roads over here. And I just sort of had to go and find a way over.
All right, so let's get started. We're starting out with announcements, and somebody here has an announcement. I can't remember who it was. Pat,
Oh,
do you have an announcement?
I think everybody heard my spiel almost already, but I am part of the Little Calumet River Underground Railroad Committee, and Dr. Larry McClellan has submitted an application to the National Park Service to have the Calumet region included in their Freedom Trail. They're going to have a National Underground Railroad network to Freedom Trail across the United States, and after 3 tries, because the National Park Service, you know, you don't dot all the I's or cross all the T's correctly, and they keep rejecting it. After the 3rd try, he finally made us last week, so we got on. So what we're trying to do is the site of this memorial, or whatever it will be, we don't know yet, is going to be in Chicago. It's going to be in Beaubien Woods, which is at 130th Street in the Calumet River. And as you're going down the Bishop Ford from Chicago, it would be on your right side or the west side of the street. And so we're trying to get some kind of a memorial over there. And we're also looking to have a trail, a marked trail, that would go from Beaubien Woods along the Calumet River, the Little Calumet River, west to the Ton Farmhouse. These were Dutch people who provided a safe house for the escaped slaves. And the Dalton family were abolitionists also, the people, the early settlers in Dalton. And they had a ferry that they operated, and they took these people across the Calumet River to the Ton Farmhouse where they could be safe until they could go again, move out of there someplace. So this is kind of the map. This is what the
It's not taken.
I don't know how well you can all see this, but this is the what's going to be the Freedom Trail here. So now we have to find out from the Forest Reserve. The National Park Service is good, but I don't know. We don't know if they're going to provide any money to us for a memorial. I have designed something, but I mean I don't know if that's going to go either. So, but it would be a self-explanatory little thing. You could read about it and then you could do the trail. And nobody would have to man it because I don't want to get people all upset. We don't have anybody to pay people to do this. Okay, well, you don't have to. But anyway, we'll see if that works or not. So we're just starting on the way. And next week we have a conversation with the mayor-elect of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, and we're going to try to get some money from her for this. And since she's a black woman, we're hoping she'll be sympathetic to our cause. And so we'll see. I mean, we don't know. It's just a work in progress right now. But I have done nothing but report to you. But really, Larry McClellan is the guy who wrote the 3 applications, and it was 39 pages. So he did a lot of work on that. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
Michael? Actually, we do have another announcement. Exit 0 will be shown at Steelworkers Park, 87th and the Lake,
Okay,
Tuesday, August 27th. And it will be, there's no time for it because you have to wait until the sun goes down.
yeah.
But it's the story of the demise of Wisconsin Steel and in particular the impact that it had on Chris Woolley and her family.
That's Exit
So,
0.
yep.
That was on Channel 11, a couple months ago?
Yeah.
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 So, and you know, I think I saw it at the Field Museum when it was halfway finished. Remember? I don't know if you were there. Okay. Any other announcements? Okay, I just have a couple. I have probably within 2 or 3 months we'll have the 20-year history of the Association for the Wolf Lake Initiative written, published, hopefully. The manuscript is ready to send to a publisher probably in a couple weeks. So I've been working on it for 20 years. Not really, for 10 years. And if anybody wants to be alerted when it comes in, just put your name and email there.
Okay.
That would help. There's also information on our Wetlands Festival over Memorial Day weekend. It's May 25th and the 26th. And that will be at the Environmental Education Center in Hammond and at the Visitors Center at William Powers in the afternoon, and then Sunday morning as well. It goes for a day and a half. Okay, that's the announcements. I want to introduce our speaker. Paul Labovitz was appointed Superintendent of the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore in 2014. He began his career with the National Park Service in 1988. A native of Philadelphia, he earned a bachelor's degree in forestry from Penn State University and earned an MBA from a Maryland university. That was on your page, and I was always curious about a Maryland university.
So yeah, I don't know how good. I went to Frostburg State for that
Okay,
in Western Maryland.
okay,
Any alumni here from Frostburg?
okay. And he is now superintendent of the Indiana Dunes National Park and will be telling us the difference between the two.
It involves bags of money.
Take that.
So to your question, will the Park Service give you any money? Probably not. Because I was just kidding about the bags of money. I'm very intimidated by the cameras. I usually ask the first thing, is there any media members or elected officials in the room? I'm only kidding. I'll try to behave. And if you want to scare the kids, show them this video later on.
We're hoping to get money from the Forest Reserve of Cook County again.
Yeah, so I was fascinated to hear about the Underground Railroad, including the Calumet region. It's a good idea. So I've known Michael a long time. When I was working on Rivers and Trails projects over here from Ohio, I've been living in the region for 5 years. In a couple weeks is my anniversary, May 19th, and I have some slides too, Michael. Is it? Can I show them or?
Yeah, we could set up. We don't have a slide projector though.
Okay,
Sorry.
so I thought maybe if you run it, could you run it through the computer?
Yeah, we
That
should be able to.
that stick drive had a PowerPoint presentation on it.
Okay.
So if we can do that,
Can you figure out? What,
yeah, well, I can tell you what file it is.
okay.
Could I figure something out? That's it.
Doesn't he look like he would be a marshal or something? Yeah. He does.
Oh, and let me. It's good to turn this on.
So we'll see.
It's gotta
Technology
warm
will
up
be
a
our
little
friend.
bit.
Sure.
I forgot.
Same here with me. Gotta warm up a little bit. So, Penn State forester, grew up in inner city Philadelphia. Had a 7th grade nun tell me, "You will never amount to anything," and then probably hit me. And I probably deserved it.
In the back of the head.
Oh, she pulled her sideburns.
Oh.
Yeah, it was horrible. Nothing. 40 years of therapy, I was fine. So, and my kids went to public school. So, no, I've been with the Park Service almost 31 years. And 32 years ago, I was working in the private sector. I managed a 10,000-acre property in western Pennsylvania that was owned by the chairman of Rockwall International. It was a place basically for him to hunt and fish with his buddies. And we managed timber and wildlife. We had a little coal mine. We did a little agriculture. Someone said to me, you should work for the National Park Service. And I remember very distinctly saying to them, I will never work for the National Park Service. Just like that. I like to hunt and fish and trap. I'm okay cutting trees down. I'm a forester, commodity, wood, paper, clean air, clean water. And my impression of the National Park Service was, can't do any of that. My wife, who dreamed of being a park ranger, worked at Yellowstone, Grand Tetons. I had never been out of Eastern Time at that point in my life. And here I am 31 years into the Park Service career, loving it. And it turned out that was not all true. And it's been an interesting ride. So here I am, and hopefully I will figure out a way to advance these slides. Pointer.
You just press the down arrow on the computer. I think
Oh, okay.
Down arrow or space bar.
space.
There we go. So a little bit about the Indiana Dunes National Park. 15,000 acres. We just celebrated 50 years in 2016, along with the centennial of the Park Service. But there's this really interesting discussion. We had our name changed in February. Government shut down for 30 plus days. The government reopens, and as the president is signing budget bills, on page 568 of the Homeland Security bill is 4 sentences that change the name of Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore to Indiana Dunes National Park. And it had been an effort for 3+ sessions of Congress by Pete Wisglosky to change the name, including a standalone bill in both the House and the Senate that never ever made it out to the point where the president could vote on it. And so Pete's strategy was, Plan B was bury the language somewhere that would just happen. And the end result is the same. It's a good civics lesson. Interestingly, these bills had unanimous support by the entire House delegation and both U.S. senators, including Senator Donnelly, who was elected out, and newly elected Senator Braun, who one of the first things the new senators did was pass a bill in the Senate in early January to get this bill moving in the current session. They didn't need to. So I put this slide up because the government, we are here not only to help you, but we are here to confuse you. So there are 419 units of the National Park System. So what does this name thing mean? It means everything. And it means absolutely nothing. The name change is just that. It changes the name. Does not change any of the legal authorities of the park. Doesn't give us any more budget. The only thing it gives us is a perception that we are at some unreal but perceived real hierarchy within that system as top dog. We are in the company of Yellowstone, Yosemite, Grand Canyon, Everglades. So of all those 419 places, here's a little smattering of their names. Every one of them is considered legally equal, and but the name thing is perceived. How many of you think that I have a bucket list? I'm going to go visit all the national parks. And I always say, wow, 419. They're like, no, 60, 61. I said, well, then you're not visiting all the national parks. There's 419 national parks. They just have crazy names like lake shores, seashores, battlefields, military parks, memorials, monuments. It's very confusing. And I will tell you, most people don't care. But I will tell you, inside the Park Service, people care. For the Park Service Centennial, there was talk of making all 398 at the time national parks, and it was quickly shot down. And my theory was the folks that were at Yellowstone and the Grand Canyon and the Grand Tetons didn't want to share that name with the likes of an Indiana Dunes or a Lincoln Boyhood or a pick a national park that's not a national park by name. There is a pecking order internally that they call them the crown jewels. They're all crown jewels. That's why they're part of the national park system. So Pullman National Monument here in Chicago, February 19th, 2015, a new national park unit, right? It's a national park site. It's called a national monument. Nationally significant story, arguably globally significant story and part of that system. So I accept the thanks in advance for confusing you as members of the public. Now you know the truth. I do joke about they tripled all of our salaries, and every day a van load of bags of money comes to the park because of the name change. And every once in a while somebody says, "Really?" And I say, no. We only save a little money on our signs because there's less letters in the sign. So we're saving big money. We're actually going to take one of the Lakeshore signs down and auction it off at the Indiana Dunes Birding Festival next Saturday. And we're going to test the market to see what collectible Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore paraphernalia will bring on the open market. So, all of you have been to the dunes at some point, right? So I give you a little tour. Pinhook Bog, a lot of you probably haven't been to Pinhook Bog. This is a little remote property separate from the larger part of the park. It actually is on the north side of the Indiana Toll Road in LaPorte County. This is a picture of the Upland Trail. So this is another crazy thing I inherited when I got here. Park closed at 8 o'clock, it closed at dusk, right? People would ask a question, "Hey, where can I take my dog?" And I would say, "Well, how much time do you have?" Because every 50 feet on the beach, the rules changed based on town ownership and blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, no drinking in the national park. Couldn't drink alcoholic beverages. You couldn't be there after dusk. So if you were a couple and you were over 21 and you were enjoying a sunset with a box of wine, because we still don't allow glass containers, we would write you 2 tickets for a park closure violation and drinking in the park. And if you had your dog with you, you probably got a 3rd ticket. It was terrible. Have a nice day. Welcome to your national park. But I can't talk about that right now. I have to go to the meeting about why we're not relevant anymore in the country. That's how crazy we are. So we changed some of the rules, including the Pinhook Bog Upland Trail. So the bog itself is fenced off. We have a locked gate. You can only get in there with a ranger. It's probably a good idea. There's rare plants in there, and it's a wonky boardwalk through a bog. It's a little dangerous. But there's a 2-mile upland trail that would only be accessible when we unlock the parking lot to do the programs in the bog. And we decided, let's just leave the gate open. The bog is locked, and let people enjoy the upland trail. And I had a chief ranger at the time who would have been very happy if all humans would stop coming to the dunes. It would make his job much easier. He thought, we're going to have problems here. People are going to be stealing plants and drinking there. Teenagers would have sex there. What are parks for, right? So we left the gate open. We have no problems with drinking. We have no problems with all that stuff. And we don't have to send a ranger there twice a day to unlock and lock a gate to keep people out. So you can enjoy the upland trail at Pinhook Bog. It's a wonderful thing. West Beach, we're doing a lot of investment in the bathhouse. Needs a new roof, needs some electrical work. If you've been there, the Succession Trail, we've been some repairs on that boardwalk. I drive into West Beach and I think I'm on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And then I realize I'm in Indiana, and I can't believe it. My brother, by the way, thinks I live in Mexico, and I sent him pictures of the lake. He's a Philly guy. He's not that bright. So I said, look at your map. Indiana has this 45-mile coastline, and we have a national park that's right on it. It's spectacular. So that's kind of fun. I don't know why I'm shaking this at you. It does nothing for me. So the Paul Douglas Center in Gary. So I tell people, you folks know Gary. Most people, when they think of Gary, have a very bad impression. When I tell them about the Douglas Center and the dune and swale and the oak savanna habitats there, and a 2-mile hike from here to the beach where you get a view of the skyline of Chicago, and you see amazing wildflowers in the spring, you see beaver, you might see muskrat, otter, deer, millions of birds, millions of wildflowers, you're in Gary, Indiana. So I kid Mayor Wilson about the city emblem, which is a big steel crucible pouring molten steel over the earth. It's not a logo that does well in black and white, right? That's not the image of Gary anymore. We need to change that. And they need to change it to the amazing, globally significant habitats that are there in Gary, Indiana. And our Douglas Center is a great day-use environmental education center. So we have some problems. We had a flying saucer land on the beach over at Portage January a year ago. The lake level is up 4 feet since I moved here 5 years ago. It was getting close to a low, and now it's about a foot below the historic high in 5 years. And so, coupled with amazing storms, we have people who surf here at the Portage Lakefront. I never thought this phrase would ever emit from my mouth. Surf Indiana. People surf Indiana. And they prefer to do it in the wintertime, which is mind-boggling. They're covered with ice, they have wetsuits on, and they're recreating on Lake Michigan. With,
They do it right here.
yeah,
they do it
yeah,
every-
it's mind-boggling. Surf Indiana.
Yeah.
Who'd have thought? We're working on trying to fix this. We're trying to get safe access to the beach. The beach is changing size. The building is probably okay. The current mayor of Portage is very nervous about the building. I think he's probably more nervous about the results of today's primary than the building at the Portage Lakefront. But nothing happens fast in government. And this is a 2-year-old problem now. And we're trying to basically, the building itself is becoming the observation platform. How do we get people safely to a beach that changes dimension almost every day? Welcome to my world. Coles Bog, if you know about this place, it's basically where Dr. Henry Chandler Coles defined what is the science of ecology. We've done some infrastructure improvements in there. It's a beautiful, this is my favorite trail. I'm doing a bird walk here Saturday a week from this week for the festival, and I'll actually bring somebody who knows the birds, because my idea of birding is, there's one, there's another one. But somebody will know it and know it. I'm actually not that bad, but I don't know them as good as some of these folks. But I'll jabber a little bit about park issues and bird at the same time. It'll be fun. Found out that there's a four-toed salamander, which is state listed. That's common along this trail. One of the only parts of the places in the state where you can find it. One of our great partners is the Dunes Learning Center. It's a residential environmental education center that uses the old Camp Goodfellow, U.S. Steel's summer camp for their employees and their families. And I tell people some of the best work at the Indiana Dunes happens here. And if you have a chance to, they have a big event in September to raise money. They have a couple of open houses during the year. If you want to come see what the camp has turned into and get an experience about what these kids are being exposed to. Every day when we have kids here, you see kids who live within a couple miles of Lake Michigan who have never seen the lake. You have kids who have never been in the woods. You have kids who have never been outside at night without streetlights. And they are terrified. The kids will ask, are there sharks in Lake Michigan? You know, will a lion attack me in the woods? They have no idea of what the outdoors is in their own community. And after 3 or 4 days at the Dunes Learning Center, the teachers tell you the vibe of the class has changed, that the outdoor experience has opened up these kids' minds. They work better as a team, they're happier, and they're more engaged. And I mean, it's like, guess what? Remember when we were little and your folks threw you outside and said, come back for dinner? You were outside with fresh air, getting exercise, you were exploring the neighborhood. Even me in the inner city, I went down to the Delaware River, was 5 blocks away, very industrial waterfront. I would break windows and set fires. I was having a great time, right? And here I am. I'm a superintendent of a national park. Court ordered, actually. Question?
Paul, do you mind if we ask questions as you go through?
No, not a problem.
What is the future of the Goodfellow Lodge on their property?
So that's a great question. Nothing about $5 million won't fix. We're struggling with this, basically the old dining hall, which is a spectacular building, but it was designed as a warm season dining hall. And so because it's historic, we're required to adhere to certain standards of the Secretary of Interior for preservation. And ultimately, it's hard to convert a building like that to a modern use that makes it worth spending $4 or $5 million on. So if I had $4 or $5 million, I wouldn't fix that building. I'd double the size of the camp, because that's the demand we have. So we're struggling with, what are we going to use it for? How are we going to get the money to convert it to that use, and will we be able to do it given those standards? So right now, it's snake, woodpecker, and raccoon habitat. And it's heading down fast. It's in really bad shape. And we're struggling with that use. What do? Hey, it would be a great restaurant, brew pub. Well, yeah, it's right next to a youth camp. I don't think so. So the camp use adjacent to it has actually limited some of the potential uses for it. Oh, it could be a bed and breakfast. Oh, it could be this, could be that. Not with a bunch of fourth graders 100 feet down the road. So we're struggling with that. Anybody here interested in, $4 million donation? You can help us figure it out. Think about it. I'll ask you again at the end. So you're familiar with the Century of Progress homes in Beverly Shores from the World's Fair in the 30s. They were barged over and plopped on the dune. They sat there for decades. We now have a very innovative program with Indiana Landmarks where they sublease them to people who have spent collectively about $10 million at restoring them. And the House of Tomorrow is the only one left. And right now, Landmarks is looking for someone who wants to live rent-free on the lakefront. And there's an asterisk there. It should be an asterisk. There's a caveat. You pay all your rent up front for those 50 years in restoring the building. A couple $1 million. What a deal. Right? Anybody here interested? If you had $6 million, you could do both projects. You could live here and then develop something at the Camp Goodfellow, the Goodfellow Lodge. We all read Popular Mechanics, right, when we were younger, and we were all going to fly our airplanes to work in the future. You didn't read Popular Mechanics? No. All right, well, they still have it at the library. I would recommend it, because they still have an article like twice a year about you flying to work in your airplane. This house didn't have a garage, it had an airplane hangar to accommodate that. They were thinking of that in the 30s.
Oh, there's the plane. I just saw it.
Did you see a plane? Oh yeah, here it is, right there. Yep. I never noticed that before. So yeah, it was the first glass structure. It's really significant architecturally. It's going to be a challenge, but it will be spectacular when they pull it off. We just had a Logs to Lustron tour on Saturday. 500 people looking at log homes through lustrons, architectural examples in the park. Spectacular event. And then we do a Century of Progress tour in end of September. We'll sell 600 tickets in 20 minutes. Part of the lease deal is they have to make the homes available one day a year for a tour. And we sell those tickets out almost instantly. Shelburne Farm, which is just a little bit south of where our headquarters is, was an old Swedish farm, crappy soil, a real struggle of a place to farm. We are doing some work with 4-H and Future Farmers of America and the Dunes Learning Center with some livestock during the spring, summer, and fall. There are chickens there year-round. We have a couple of events there. In March, we have maple sugar time. And in September, we have apples. And with climate change, it will become papayas in 30 years. But it's really been popular to see the critters back. Our only National Historic Landmark is the Bailey Homestead. And this is a great building. Another building where just a couple $1 million will fix it. We just finished a historic structure report. And it turned out that we had to close the building because roof members were just stopped in midair. They weren't tied together. The house is leaning. And when the engineer tells me and my deputy superintendent, Chris Pergel, you guys really shouldn't be on the stairwell at the same time. He tells me, and you should wear a hard hat while you're inside the building. So we're going to try to figure that one out. This one has potential for some kind of adaptive reuse that's commercially viable. An event center, bed and breakfast, offices, or something. And so we're shopping that idea around right now. And it's cliche. Nothing a few $1 million won't fix. Things are very expensive. So we're hoping with the president's talk about an infrastructure bill to address some of the Park Service's maintenance backlog, that projects like this will actually get some traction. So we're going to try to stabilize it and see what happens. What I didn't know, we have a very active fire program at Indiana Dunes. I have basically a fire company. They're actually doing prescribed burns today up at Sleeping Bear Dunes. We do fire management for a dozen other national parks from Ohio to Minnesota. And we burn this year over 1,000 acres of the dune on purpose. We had another 400 acres that burned trains and other human-caused fires. So wildfire is a real issue there. And then the prescribed burns help us do habitat management to introduce change so that the story of succession with plant communities can continue. So if you know someone who has a little problem with pyromania, NPS Wildland Firefighter is a great career. We actually pay you to start fires. It's awesome. I had a picture of the Sleeping Bear Superintendent today with the drip torch starting a fire up there. I'd never seen him look so happy. It kind of spooked me that he was having that much fun. And so I'm setting up some professional help for him. You know, the whole lakefront and inland a couple miles was a giant marsh, a great marsh. And the bird watching is spectacular. Right now, the great egrets are back. There'll be 30 egrets in a tree in Beverly Shores. It looks like the Everglades. In fact, when you're in the Everglades, you know what people say? It looks like Beverly Shores down here. That's how awesome it is. I'm going to get an animatronic alligator for the marsh. Just to mess with people, see if they notice. But, you know, we're trying to infuse access into all these places for people to just sit and enjoy the scenery, to bird watch, to do whatever they can do in their national park. And it's been really fun building that kind of access. So Mount Baldy. It'll be 5 years, it'll be 6 years in July when the boy was buried in the hole. And so what most people don't know, now what were the headlines? Remember the headlines? Boy swallowed by doom. Oh. So you know what really happened? Boy in closed area climbs in hole and is buried accidentally. So nobody talked about that. Boy and his father, a cousin and an uncle were hiking in a closed area that was closed for a restoration project. They found an 11-foot deep hole, about 30 inches in diameter, and the kid thought, this would be cool, I'll climb down the hole. Couldn't get out. They tried to get him out, and the whole thing collapsed on him. He was buried for 3 or 4 hours. They dug him out. He was essentially non-responsive, was dead, and was revived and is fine today. Good outcome. But the news blew it way out of proportion. They still are. So, of course, the Park Service overreacts. We closed Mount Baldy for 4 years. 4 years. So we open it. It'll be 2 years ago. We opened it in July. We have a good idea. I think the next picture will show you what happened. Nope, it won't. I don't have that picture up here. So what happened was, in the 30s, there was a forest that was inland, and most of Mount Baldy as an open dune was further north than it is today. The dune is moving south with wind. The front of the dune is being starved for sand because the sand movement along Lake Michigan from east to west has been interrupted by the Michigan City Marina. And so as the dune moves south, it buries things. So it buried this forest of cottonwoods, and when those trees are buried and they rot, they form a tube that's very fragile, but it's a void in the sand. And when the sand blows off the top of it, that hole is visible for about a day. Most of the holes we found are small. The kid found the mother of all sand holes, the main stem of a big cottonwood tree. We actually have a photo, an aerial photo. We can pinpoint it with geolocation, the exact tree that hole was formed by. So we're keeping people off the dune itself. We're routing people to the beach to the west of the dune, and the parking lot's open, and we're actually thinking of letting people run up and down the south face of the dune, which is still moving further south and covering up. It covered up about a half a parking space this last year. But the dune is much lower in elevation because that sand is just not getting nourished on the front of it. So it's an interesting spot. We know more about Mount Baldy. We basically did an MRI on the whole dune with ground penetrating radar. There's houses under, there's shacks under there, there's roads under there. It's an amazing, it was an amazing geologic study. And imagine this, everywhere else where there are dunes and there are buried trees, now that they're looking, they're finding these voids. Shocking, right? So you know what the most dangerous part of a Mount Baldy visit is? Interstate 94. So if you make it to the parking lot and you don't climb in holes, you're probably going to be fined. So note to self. I tried to convince, I don't know if you're familiar with the movie franchise Tremors, about these big worms that live underground. We were trying to figure out how we can do a Tremors movie here at Mount Baldy. And I was going to be like, in the first scene it would get me. My Ranger hat will be on top of the sand. You know, we can make all this money and then fix the Bailey Homestead and fix Camp Goodfellow. Kevin Bacon declined to be in the movie. So back to the drawing board. A couple cool things that are going on. So, and this sounds terrible, but I'm going to talk about the crappy business savvy of the National Park Service. How many of you have the senior pass to national parks? Pay $10 for it? Yeah, thanks for that. We give you access to the whole system for the rest of your life for $10, right? What a dumb business move. Now, you know, I don't want to make a judgment, but most people at their retirement age are usually healthy financially. We got people who are doing okay financially, and we're giving away the keys to the kingdom for $10. Now it's $80. They raised the price. And I'll tell you a funny story. We sold more passes the month before the price went up than we had sold in 15 years. And I sold millionaires from Beverly Shores in line to get a $10 pass, so they have to pay $80. Now the difference between 10 and 80 goes to the National Park Foundation to form a principle of money that will benefit parks. So if you don't have one or you paid $80 for it, thank you. I'm just messing with you about the lifetime of access. But we have already convinced you that parks are great and you like to go to them. We have a program now for fourth graders. You go online, you do a little exercise, you get a voucher, and you get a national park pass good for 1 year for you and your family. And we're hooking kids early so that they become lifetime visitors and supporters of the national park system. All public lands. Every kid in the park. Of course, we call it EKIP because we're government, and we make up an acronym. I'm like, what is EKIP? Oh, every kid in the park. That's crazy. Just call it every kid in the park. That's part of the message. EKIP. I love it. So I lived in Akron, Ohio, where acronyms were invented. And that's just a joke. I talked about these festivals. Birding Festival next week, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th. Apples in September. Maple Sugar Time, first 2 weekends in March. A relatively new one called, this is another great acronym, Outdoor Adventure Festival. OAF. I tried to convince them to make it the largest outdoor adventure festival. LOAF, right? It's a great acronym. In October, you come to the park for a weekend. We have about 80 different programs where you can try just about everything you wanted to try and never did in your park. You want to try stand-up paddleboarding. We even had somebody talk about hang gliding, scuba diving, hiking, biking, painting, birding, you know, all these things. So there's some structure to allow you to test drive something that you might want to try. And so we get bang for the buck when we do things like this. So we get 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people show up, which is a lot of folks for a weekend at the park beyond beach season. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to convince people that the Indiana Dunes is not just a beach park, that it's a year-round destination, that the cross-country skiing and snowshoeing is spectacular. The eastern half of the park is in the snow belt. Buffalo gets all the credit in the winter. Eastern Porter and LaPorte counties get that kind of snow off of Lake Michigan. I live in that snow belt. I love it because I moved here from Minnesota. You get all the snow, but not all the cold. But, you know, in Minnesota, it's dry cold, right? That's what they say. It's true. 29 degrees here is chillier than 5 below in Minnesota. Crazy. Humidity. So festivals, fun stuff. Park volunteers, and I know somebody in the room who's an amazing park volunteer, Mary. Jim Whitenack's our new volunteer coordinator. Well, he's been doing it over a year now. He's spectacular, and he's organizing it and ramping it up because a lot of people, one, we need help, and our volunteers contribute about the equivalent of 30 full-time employees worth of help. I would argue that the quality of that help is better than some of our full-time employees. The commitment is mind-boggling. I see you counting people. Last time I saw you was at Apples, right? You were counting people coming in? Maple Sugar Time, that's right. That's right, that was just 2 months ago. So all the categories, we have this one that gets me is a drop-in volunteering. You can basically show up at the visitor center and say, you know, I'd like to do some volunteer work right now. We'll put you to work instantly. It's amazing. So Jim and his crew have done a great job making that happen. Partners. It's all about partners. So we can do nothing by ourselves. We have, this is a sampling of who we work with on a daily basis. Our official Park Friends group, the Dunes National Park Association. Our unofficial, but just as important friends group, the Friends of Indiana Dunes. Save the Dunes, the Shirley Hines Land Trust, the Dunes Learning Center, the Indiana Department of Natural Resources, Indiana Dunes State Park, ArcelorMittal, great partner. NIPSCO, great partner. Dunes Learning Center, the county tourism departments in Lake, Porter, and LaPorte counties. I could go on and on. We're establishing relationships with the local universities. It is mind-boggling. So, partners. It's all about partners. And the Park Service, parks like Indiana Dunes really lead the way at the way we recruit, work with, and manage the park with volunteer help, which is great. I should have put up there the Student Conservation Association, Wisconsin Youth Corps. You know, there's a million partners, which is kind of fun. So we had a name change. We went down to Indianapolis back in March, about a month afterwards. One of our local state reps had a proclamation in the House, and one of our state senators did it in the state Senate to celebrate the name change to Indiana Dunes National Park. We asked some of our partners and our colleagues to come down, and they all showed up. We had 50 people down there. I got to address both the House and the Senate. I swore them all in as junior rangers. They all put junior ranger badges on. Actually, I didn't swear them in. They wouldn't let me swear them in. They were afraid it would be a commitment. I thought that was really funny. But I gave them badges anyway, and we saw them all walking around the State House that day with their junior ranger badges on. It was a stitch. But it was really exciting. Imagine a topic like this where you come into a state government, the stuff these folks have to deal with every day is generally not that much fun. We had a happy message with unanimous support, didn't cost anything, and it's going to be very good for the state economically. And I'll talk a little bit about the economics of the park as I wrap it up. The other thing that most folks don't know is that we do international work. We have sister parks that have been going on for over 25 years in some places. So the newest one is with some protected areas and national parks in Costa Rica. 12 Midwest national parks and programs are partnering with, I think, 9 Costa Rican national parks and protected areas because of the neotropical migratory birds that are summer birds are their winter birds. And so we're creating some exchange around migratory birds. Really exciting. I'm actually hoping to go down sometime in the fall to sign another agreement with them and see these 9 parks and protected areas and develop some school-to-school exchanges and staff exchanges. Very cool stuff. The other project we have is in Poland. Anybody here been to Poland? I was just there 3 weeks ago. Campinoski National Park, right outside of Warsaw, is our sister park, and they've been so since 1993. I was in Poland in 1993 at a park called Bieszczady National Park, in the extreme southeast corner on the Ukraine-Slovak border. And I met the superintendent of Campinoski, and he had some dunes along the Vistula River and similar landscapes with meadows and floodplains. And he said, "Hey, I'd like to find a park in the United States that has similar issues." My friend Dale Enquist, who was superintendent here at Indiana Dunes at the time, they started this collaboration, and it's been going on ever since. So I was invited over to speak at their 60th anniversary conference. I'd never been there. I'd been to 8 other Polish national parks, but not Campinoski, and went over for 10 days and had a blast. So we're going to try to organize a group trip over, like a little birding wildlife park visit to both Slovakia and Poland to raise awareness of what we're doing, but also to raise some money for us and for them to continue the conservation work. So amazing, amazing place. I've been to Poland maybe 8 times. And I hadn't been to Warsaw since '93. Warsaw is a sparkling new city. It was really a lot. It was 50 Shades of Grey in '93, sadly. And it is a modern, cool, comfortable, fun city, very friendly people, amazing food, and spectacular national parks. I also went to 3 other parks in eastern Poland. Biebsza National Park up near the Lithuanian border, Pilecki National Park near Belarus, and Rashonsky National Park, a little further south from Pilecki near Ukraine. Just spectacular places. Imagine a park like ours with moose running around outside of Warsaw. That's Campanoski. You see their emblem's got the moose in it. Good folks. So there's my contact information. Give me a call, come on over, have a cup of coffee, let's go take a little tour. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Yeah.
Paul, in the acquisition stage in 1966, there are properties that were satellite properties of the park, such as the Bog and Heron Rookery. Also, the Hoosier Prairie was part of that, which has then been given back to the state as a state refuge. And the question I have is the one property which was the Holbert Wetlands. I understand it's still owned by the National Park Service. What's the future of that, and are you going to continually keep that or try to get it into another organization?
Yep, good question. So we're planning on staying down there. We actually just had the Save the Dunes acquired a smaller property there and donated it to us. I can't remember the Covo property with a little bit of frontage on Lake George, and then we've also acquired a house that's right along the prairie, the Oak Savannah Trail that's managed by Lake County, and we're thinking of beefing up our presence there. When you look at what we own, what the Shirley Hines Land Trust owns, and what the DNR owns, there's 1,000 acres of public open space down there. So we're in it to stay. We're talking to the state about the Gaylord Butterfly Prairie, which is a very small property that's proximate to some other DNR lands. We actually have had a meeting later this week that we canceled because the state's trying to find out some real estate title information on some things, and we have some archaeological work that we need to clear first. So we're still in the mix down there. We are a little hesitant to acquire more satellite properties. There's a wetland reserve or a wetland mitigation bank owned by the Lake Erie Land Company, which is NIPSCO, between 94 and 90 in Lake Station. That's adjacent to the Calumet Prairie, which is a spectacular state property. And we're in the process, 189 acres, we're in the process of thinking, is it best that we have it, or is it best for the DNR to have it, or is it best for some other public entity to have it? And I could go into a long story about why that is, but we'll make sure it's public land. But I think about when we own it for 50 years, we do nothing to it, and then we spend another 50 years killing phragmites and deer on it. And we just can't do that. We have to get it to somebody who can better utilize it, but it still be public land. Sure. Any other questions? Yeah.
I just wanted to note that I was at the visitor center on Kennedy Avenue, and they said they're going to do an exhibit of the national park May 23rd through September.
Yes.
So that should be really exciting to see.
Yeah, so South Shore Convention and Visitor Authority that runs that center there on Kennedy Avenue, south of the 94, is going to exhibit their major exhibit hall with a park exhibit that we're helping put together right now. They had another exhibit that pulled out, and so the opportunity was there with the name change, and our folks have risen to the occasion and are scrambling to make something really nice for that, so thank you. So stop by and enjoy that. We hope to have some rangers there on occasions doing programs, and our junior ranger programs. Should be fun. Other questions? Yeah.
My passion is wildflower photography. My favorite spot is the Heron Rookery. On the east side of the park, you have a parking lot that's probably for 50 or 60 cars. On the west side of the Rookery is the majority of the wildflowers. And the parking lot there is a full 5-car parking lot. It's always full. You can never get in because there's more than 5 people. Any plans ever for an expansion of that parking lot?
So I would say not right now. I have to tell you, I am making parking lots bigger. I have very little energy for, sadly. And it's mostly because of our beach parking lots. We can never build parking lots big enough to accommodate the use. So what we have to try and encourage people to do is time their visit to take advantage of when it's not as busy, or to ride a bike there as opposed to drive there. It's parking lots are tricky business. Yeah. Sorry.
Like they do with some of the other national parks, is it just not economically feasible to bring in like,
Shuttle buses?
transport?
Yeah.
Shuttle buses.
So
I mean, so you could spend a few hours wherever you want.
yeah, so we're actually have two shuttles right now that we operate between Memorial Day, Labor Day on weekends. One is in the west end of the park in Gary. It basically goes from the Gary Miller South Shore stop down to Marquette Park and just loops timed with the train arrivals. We started one last summer on the east side of the park that basically takes people from our campground to the lakefront in Beverly Shores and makes a loop in that side of the park. And here's our challenge, and this relates back to parking lots. The park, I recommend to people, do not come to the Indiana Dunes National Park for a beach experience with your car on a summer weekend when the weather is nice. Unless you really enjoy being in your car, waiting for 2 hours for a free parking space. Come during the week or get there very early on the weekend. That's the sad reality. The problem is there's no way to get to the park other than your car. So I was talking about this with a couple of developers in Michigan City today. Every north-south road from 12 to the beach needs to be a little wider and have a bicycle pedestrian facility alongside of it. We're too focused on cars. We need to have some kind of a bike share to train stations so that when you hop off a train, you jump on a bike and ride down to the beach. You cannot rely on space for your individual car. And we struggle with that. So one of the things we're talking about doing, and this is just talk at this time, we've been talking about this for 3 years, which is the fast track in government. We're thinking of weekend and holiday parking on every one of our parking lots, fees, and an app on your phone that would tell you if there's a space there, so that you don't waste your time coming and waiting in a long line. We generate a little revenue, but we relieve the congestion. Because what's going to happen at some point, and the state park traffic on weekends is backed up from their gate to Interstate 94. If someone has an emergency in that state park, short of a helicopter ride, they will not make it out of there. It's public safety. It's just too congested. And what happened was the collective we built roads through a wetland that were sized for technologies that are 50 years old. And here we are, big cars, lots more cars. Some families own 5 cars. And we just don't have the room on the roads and places to park for them vehicles. I will say, if you come to the park on the 4th of July and you're lucky enough to get a space and you don't mind walking an extra 200 feet, you could be on the beach by yourself. There's plenty of beach. There's just not enough parking spaces on the 12 weekends and 3 holidays. So the congestion issue. Zion National Park, Yosemite National Park, Grand Canyon National Park have transit systems within the parks, and they're very expensive, but they work. In the Grand Canyon, when you go one way, you can only take the bus.
Right.
You can't drive your car, and so it works. But one of those full-size transit buses is probably $400,000. We have 2 propane-powered 14-passenger buses, and we need a CDL passenger-endorsed driver. We have trouble finding them. So we're going to get smaller buses that don't require the commercial driver's license, that will hold maybe 14 instead of 16 passengers. So it's interesting. I did a lot of transportation planning in my former career at Rivers and Trails, and it turns out the biggest challenge for everything we do is transportation. How do you get kids from East Chicago to the Dunes Learning Center? And inevitably, they can't afford the bus, or the bus driver gets lost and the kids miss a whole day because of transportation. It breaks your heart, and it costs a ton of money. So we're trying to stock up on vehicles so we can supply transportation and take that issue off the table. So it's tricky. Another question? I know you have another question. What's your name?
I promise. What's being done about Phragmites eradication? I remember when there were nothing but cattails. Now it's nothing but Phragmites.
So yeah, Phragmites, which is a native plant in Europe. I saw a lot of it in Poland. It was native. Common reed, they call it. And so, are you familiar with the Polish vodka, Żubrówka? It's got a blade of buffalo grass in it.
Absolutely.
We're thinking of an Indiana vodka that's got a stem of Phragmites in it. And we figured we can get rid of all the Phragmites that way by bottling a vodka with a frag piece in it. I'm half serious. We actually are talking to Journeyman Distillery about, park-themed spirit. But if I spent the money I spend on Phragmites eradication, I could fix the Bailey homestead in 5 years.
Oh, really?
We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars killing Phragmites, and my worry is we will never eradicate it. There's never been an instance of a non-native invasive like that that's ever been eradicated.
Correct.
Never. So I'm in a battle with my biologist, and I'm a biologist. I'm a forester, wildlife biologist. I'm a plant guy. Alls we keep doing when we spray the Phragmites is we reset the clock to 0, and it just comes back in and repopulates. And the system is never getting a chance to adapt to this new species that is here to stay. I will tell you, we need to find a recipe for it. We need to smoke it. We need to weave it into rugs. We need to make it illegal to pick it, so people pick it. So we need to figure out a way to use this thing that's part of our lives now. And that's not the worst of it. We're talking today about Japanese knotweed.
Oh, God.
So you're familiar with knotweed. It's a little bit like bamboo.
Yeah.
And so when I lived in Ohio, you would go like this on the ground, you'd scrape a bare spot, and 5 minutes later, knotweed was growing out of it. Right? This stuff is unbelievably pervasive. And like a lot of plants, including walnuts and tomatoes, they are allelopathic. And what that means is chemical warfare. A plant like Japanese knotweed puts chemicals in the soil around it to prevent other plants from growing there. It's war out there. It's chemical warfare of plants. Yeah.
DNR has spent a lot of money along the Grand Calumet River trying to eradicate Phragmites. Are you working with them?
So the DNR and the Nature Conservancy have done the Grand Cal. It's a decade-long process to keep whacking it back and to then replace it with native plants. And that's the key. But doing it on a large scale is really tough and expensive. So do you know Paul Labovitz from the Nature Conservancy?
I mean, Chicago.
So I genuflect when I say his name. His name is Paul, and his last name is spelled L-A like mine. People often confuse us, which I feel bad for him. But he's done amazing work on some unbelievable properties with the Nature Conservancy. And he has got he's got decades of experience now about what the long-term approach is. And I think our folks, I'm not saying we shouldn't be trying to eradicate it, but what we're trying to do is more of a triage. Some of our really high-valued natural areas like Coles Bog, a national natural landmark. The restoration work that's going on in there for over a decade is really showing up. It's not a vast sea of monoculture, frag, or cattails. There's amazing diversity in the seed bank and stuff that we've planted that's made it come back. If you can replace the Phragmites with native plants, you'll be fine. The challenge, though, is that we now have a beaver population that staggers the imagination. So we do all this restoration work. Beaver come in, they flood an area, and the Phragmites capitalizes on that newly flooded land, and you got to start all over again. And so we've started to remove some beaver.
The beavers.
Beavers, yeah. Indiana beavers are considered a nuisance species.
No.
You don't need a permit to remove them, and you're not allowed to move them somewhere else. You have to give them the permanent solution. And, I love seeing beaver in the wild when they're in balance. But when you look at the aerial photos of some of these marshes, and there's a beaver dam every 300 feet, and every tree is cut down, and everything that's underwater a year later is full of Phragmites. So it's war. I tell people nature is a monster movie. Pinhook Bog with carnivorous plants. Stay on the trail. Stay on the trail. Keep your kids on the trail. Everything is eating everything else. Everything's poisoning. Plants are talking to each other. The animals. It is a mind-boggling. So we've discovered native mussels in the Little Calumet River. Haven't seen native mussels for 40 years. One of the reasons why is they weren't looking for them, right? So we found one called the pink heel splitter. Mussels have such cool names. It's such a wild, you hear about charismatic megafauna, that's not mussels. They're underwater, they're mussels, they don't move around that much. So here's the monster movie story with a mussel. Here's how they breed. They sit on the bottom of the stream. They open up their shell, they stick out a little thing, wiggles around like a worm. A fish sees it and says, hey, I wonder if I can eat that. And the mussel grabs the fish by the face, squirts larval mussels into their gills where they live as a parasite for a couple weeks and then fall out and grow into adult mussels. It's a monster movie, right? It's very cool. So some mussels will do it to any fish. Other species of mussels are very fish species specific. And when the fish disappears, the mussel disappears. And that's what's happened. The fish diversity is so poor in some of the Lake Michigan tributaries that some of the species-specific mussels that relied on this fish are gone. And it's, so wow. So here we're talking to the Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service about some propagation of mussels, radio tagging them, and literally watching what they do with telemetry.
Tagging a mussel?
So they do actually move. They'll move, and we can see where the beds go. In fact, the ones that survive a very flashy river like the Little Calumet River are the ones that can move quick, relatively quick. The ones that don't make it get covered with sediment and they die. They just disappear. So there's mobile mussels and there's not so mobile mussels. And we think the ones in the Calumet are mobile. The heel splitter's got a wedge-shaped thing that sticks up. If you step on it, it'll split your heel open. It's kind of a cool thing. Google that one, the pink heel splitter. My favorite, this was my nickname in Minnesota, I was the fat mucket.
Fat what?
Mucket. That's what my life vest said on the back of it. We learned two things about names of endangered species on the backs of vests for school kids. You can never use fat mucket, and you can never use the pygmy sperm whale. A lot of giggles about those two. But I was the fat mucket. My pleasure to be here. Anything else? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe there's a little bit of hope in this, but maybe it's absolutely ridiculous. Japanese knotweed. I believe that last time I got my hair cut, there was a cosmetic product that included Japanese knotweed. Do you think I'm right or wrong? I'm not sure.
Could very well be. I mean, to
so
me,
there
that's
could be another use.
sure. It's probably why it's mobile around the world. Is somebody thought there was something. I heard the story today that the English thought it was an attractive plant in a garden, so they imported it from Japan and Asia, and then it just escaped, and now it's a global scourge.
Purple loosestrife, same.
Purple loosestrife, which is beautiful. Phragmites, not so much. I always compare non-native invasives with like the ringneck pheasant, right? How many of you like to eat or have hunted pheasant, right? It's spectacular. There's a nonprofit in Minnesota, the Pheasants Forever. They exist to promote the stocking and hunting of pheasants. They're not native to North America, but they're very pretty. They don't appear to displace anything native, and they're delicious, right? So Asian carp, you hear about Asian carp?
Yeah.
So, yeah, they're coming up from the Mississippi River. They're already in most of Indiana in the Wabash drainage. Do you know there's 4 different species of Asian carp? The ones that jump out of the water, that you see the videos of, silver carp. There's another one called the bighead carp, and both of them eat plankton. Remember that, plankton, the basis of the food chain, right? They eat 1/3 of their weight a day in plankton.
Whoa.
There's a grass carp. That's a real common one because people have been putting them in their fish ponds for decades. They eat aquatic vegetation, another basis of the food chain. There's one more called the black carp, and it's not as far north yet. It's about to Keokuk, Iowa. Eats mollusks, eats freshwater mussels. They eat everything in the lower part of the food chain. So the Illinois River, 90% of the biomass in some stretches of the Illinois River is Asian carp. 90% of all the life in that river is Asian carp. So what does that mean? There's nothing else. Now they're delicious. Very flaky white meat, high fish oil, good healthy, right? But Americans don't like to eat carp. So they commercially use them, make fertilizer, dog food, export some of it back to Asia. The government here is trying to eradicate Asian carp, We're sending scientists to Asia, helping them manage Asian carp because there are a shortage of them over there. They've overfished them. But they like them fresh, so it's tough to send them over there frozen as a market. It's a crazy issue. So we need a new name for Asian carp. It needs to be called silver roughy or something sexy. Right. Filet McCarp or something, I don't know. But yeah, so it's a monster movie. There's a fish called the northern snakehead that's moving north. And it's basically a big set of teeth and an intestine, and it eats everything. You try to poison the pond, it gets out and crawls to the next pond. It's a monster movie. I tell people it'll be fine. When the manatees come this far north, they'll eat them. That's not true, but they say, really, they're coming? No, but there are armadillos in southern Indiana. Climate is changing. Yeah, this is it's a crazy time. Any other questions?
Is your telephone number correct?
That will get you to Dina, who is my executive assistant.
Okay, but 216?
Oh, it's 219, I'm sorry.
Oh.
That's my Ohio number. When I was in Cleveland, yeah. Thanks for, I need to fix that.
Is the rest of the number correct except for the 6?
The rest of the number is correct. So if you have a little eye problem, just flip that over.
Yeah.
We'll fix that. It's a great park. It's we get the visitation of Yellowstone, and we are less than 1% of the size of Yellowstone. 3.5 million people a year. And the economics thing I told you I would mention before I finish up. The park is a $10 to $15 million a year business that has $250 to $500 million a year annual economic impact in Northwest Indiana. So we are the #1 tourist destination in the state, the Dunes region. And so you think of the return on investment for your tax monies that goes to the park, it's pretty good. If my retirement paid that kind of return, I would not be here right now. Yeah.
Is the cooperation between the state DNR and the national parks pretty good these days?
Yeah.
I mean, historically, you were the invasive species.
No, we have a great relationship with the state. For most folks, they don't even realize there's a difference. We share people, we share equipment, we share money. I have lunch with those guys a lot. Mickey Rhea, the new state park manager, and I are good friends. Yeah, we are thick as thieves. So I have a good invasive species story, consider that comment. So I was in a canoe in Minneapolis with an Ojibwa Indian, and we were looking at European buckthorn, which is an invasive shrub on the bank. And I said, I was telling somebody it's an invasive from Europe, and she's behind me. She says, yeah, tell me about it. And I said to her, I got that. She laughed. It was funny. But you think about it. Red maple was an invasive here 11,000 years ago. Everything here was invasive at some point.
Including the Native Americans.
Yeah, right. So the argument is, did they come from Asia, humans, to North America? And I heard in Indianapolis about 20 years ago, a guy told a story in Indian that there was an archaeologist went to the bottom of the Bering Strait and they found human footprints in the sediment, and they were heading from North America to Asia. It was funny. It was a good joke, but who knows, right? So at what point, my staff says we can't have honeybees at Shelburne Farm because honeybees are not native to North America. Pay no attention that they've been here for 400 years. So when does something become native? Yeah.
In speaking of climate change, what's the greatest challenge that faces you next 20, 30 years?
So from a climate perspective, vegetation management. So a lot of the species that were common for the last 100, 200 years in the dunes are moving north. So corner blue butterfly was a federally listed butterfly. We spent a lot of money trying to protect them. They're gone from the dunes. They're now found further north in Michigan and Wisconsin. And no matter what we did in hindsight, they were moving north. And we should have figured that out. So sugar maple, we have maple sugar time. Well, sugar maple are moving north. So how are you gonna make maple syrup if you don't have any sugar maples? And in 50 years, we may not have sugar maples. The storm frequencies, the intense localized storms, the waves on the lake, the lake level, the frequency of lake levels, it's 15-year cycle, high and low. What they're saying is that the highs are going to be higher, the lows are going to be lower, and the frequency is going to be further apart. What does that mean? And we're learning now. There's a gentleman in Ogden Dunes has a house right on the lake, built it 15 years ago. There was 300 foot of beach in front of it. Now the waves coat his house with ice in the winter, and he wants help. And I'm like, I hope you have insurance, because we're not going to let you put engineered structure in front of your house, which won't help you, and it'll just make it worse on either side of the structure. People don't want to hear that. So stay away from the lake, stay away from the river, stay away from the ocean with buildings, you'll lose.
But weren't there a lot of homes in Beverly Shores that just went into the lake
Yeah.
with time, and so the same thing may happen in Ogden Dunes?
Correct. And they know why, because the port and the mills built out into the lake, and they interrupted that sand flow. And it's a long story, but at the time that was being planned, the federal government said this port project was not feasible because that cost of that sand nourishment that you have to replace mechanically makes it financially infeasible. Allegedly, the state of Indiana said, oh, we'll take care of that, pulled that issue out of the discussion, the project became feasible, they built the port. 50 years later, the state said, nah, we're not going to do that. So there's some trouble. There's some disagreement and recollection about that. Michigan City has the same issue, but the Army Corps does beach nourishment on Crescent Dune, immediately west of Michigan City, because the problem was 100% caused by the federal government.
Maybe that's the answer to the question, because there was something in the Northwest Indiana Times about pulling sand, cleaning sand out of places, and they were taking it out into the lake,
Right.
and that it should be used along the beaches.
Sure.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so, we know that we estimate 250,000 of cubic yards of sand are not being deposited at the Portage Lakefront through natural processes every year. So the cost of the dredging that goes on for NIPSCO and for ArcelorMittal and the port, and they dispose of that sand in the near offshore. But that sand really needs to come up on the beach. That doubles the cost of dredging. So it's all about money. So it's about $6 to $8 additional per cubic yard of sand to place it on the beach, and nobody wants to pay for that. It's, again, nothing a couple $1 million won't fix. So, did you have a question?
No.
It's a complicated place. I like it. I think I have the attention deficit disorder, so I can, something new every day. We have 100 employees full-time year-round at the dunes, another 50 or so seasonal that are just starting this month. It's considered a big park for the Midwest. Operationally, acreage-wise, it's not really that big, considering Wrangell St. Elias National Park is bigger than the state of Connecticut. So, but in the Midwest, 15,000 acres of parkland is a big park. So, okay?
I think you got all the questions, right? Thank you very much. I just want to mention that this is the last Calumet Revisited for this season. So we won't be back until September. And I think we have, who do we have in September?
Sarah Coulter.
Sarah Coulter, yeah, from Calumet Collaborative. And then Walter, you'll be in October, right?
Right.
And then the rest of the speakers, I'm going to have to start calling this month, so we can schedule them throughout the rest of the 2019, 2020. So, anyway, thanks everybody for coming tonight and in previous sessions, forums, and we'll see you in September.
Thank you.